Hello, everybody. My name's AJ. This is the AJ Snot channel. We are still playing The Legend of Zelda, but this is something I want to do that's a little different. This is going to be an odd readings episode, which means, we're not just going to do our normal commentary. So what I thought I wanted to do for you guys was to read you a little bedtime story, a little something to ease you into dreamland. And what that's going to be today is a story in the collection of HP Lovecraft with Zelia Bishop called The Curse of Yig. Okay, so this is The Curse of Yig. In 1925, I went into Oklahoma looking for snake lore, and I came out with a fear of snakes that will last me the rest of my life. I admit it is foolish, since there's natural explanations for everything, and I saw and heard, but it masters me nonetheless. If the old story had been all there was to it, I would have not been so badly shaken. My work as an American Indian ethnologist has hardened me to all kinds of extravagant legendary, and I know that simple white people can beat the Redskins at their own game when it comes to fanciful inventions. But I can't forget what I saw with my own eyes at the insane asylum in Guthrie. I called it the asylum because a few of the oldest settlers told me I would find something important there. Neither Indians nor white men would discuss the snake god legends I had come to trace. The oil boom newcomers, of course, knew nothing of such matters, and the red men and old pioneers were plainly frightened when I spoke of them. Not more than 6 or 7 people mentioned the asylum, and those who did were careful to talk in whispers. But the whispers said that Dr. McNeil could shew me a very terrible relic and tell me all I wanted to know. He could explain why Yig, the half-human father of serpents, is a shunned and feared object in central Oklahoma, and why the old settlers shiver at the secret Indian orgies which make the autumn days and nights hideous with ceaseless beatings of tom-toms in lonely places. It was with the scent of a hound on the trail that I went to Guthrie, for I had spent many years collecting data on the evolution of serpent worship among the Indians, and I had always felt, from well-defined undertones of legend and archaeology, that the great Quetzalcoatl, I don't know if I'm saying that right, the great Quetzalcoatl, benign snake god of the Mexicans, had an older and darker prototype, and during recent months I had well nigh proved in a series of researches stretching from Guatemala to the Oklahoma plains. But everything was tantalizing and incomplete, for above the border the cult of the snake was hedged about by fear and furtiveness. Now, it appeared that a new and copious source of data was about to dawn, and I sought the head of the asylum with an eagerness I did not try to cloak. Dr. McNeil was a small, clean-shaven man of somewhat advanced years, and I saw once from his speech and manner that he was a scholar of no mean admittance in many branches outside his profession. I'm sorry, that word was attainments. In many branches outside of his profession. Grave and doubtful, when I first made known my errand, his face grew thoughtful as he carefully scanned my credentials and the letter of introduction which a kindly old ex-Indian agent had given me. "So you've been studying the Yig legend, eh?" he reflected sententiously. I know that many of our Oklahoma ethnologists have tried to connect it with Quetzalcoatl, but I don't think any of them have traced the intermediate steps so well. You've done a remarkable job for a young man as young as you seem to be. And you certainly deserve all the data we can give. I don't suppose old Major Moore or any of those others told you what it is I have here. They don't like to talk about it, and neither do I. It's a tragic and very horrible, but that is all. I refuse to consider anything supernatural. There is a story about it that I'll tell you after you see it. A devilish, sad story. But one I won't call magic. It merely shews the potency that beliefs over some people. I'll admit there are times when I feel a shiver that's more than physical, but in daylight I set all that down to nerves. I'm not a young fellow anymore, alas. To come to the point, the thing that I have, you might call a victim of Yig's curse. A physically living victim. We don't let the bulk of the nurses see it, although most of them know it's here. There are just two steady old chaps, whom I let feed it and clean out its quarters. Used to be three. But good old Stevens passed on a few years ago. Suppose I'll have to break in a new group pretty soon. For the thing doesn't seem to age or change much, and we old boys can't last forever. Maybe the ethics of the near future will let us give it a merciful release, but that's hard to tell. Did you see that single ground glass basement window over the east wing when you came up the drive? Because that is where it is. I'll take you there myself now. You needn't make any comment. Just look through the movable panel in the door and thank God the light isn't any stronger. Then I'll tell you the story, or as much as I've been able to piece together. We walked downstairs very quietly and did not talk as we threaded the corridors of the seemingly deserted basement. Dr. McNeil unlocked a gray painted steel door, but it was only a bulkhead leading to a further stretch of hallway. At length, he paused before the door marked B116, opened a small observation panel, which he could use only by standing on tiptoe, and pounded several times upon the painted metal, as if to arouse the occupant, wherever it might be. A faint stench came from the aperture as the doctor unclosed it, and I fancied his pounding elicited a kind of low hissing response. Finally, he motioned me to replace him at the peephole, and I did with a causeless increasing tremor. The barred ground glass window, close to the earth outside, admitted only feeble and uncertain pallor, and I had to look into the melodious din for several seconds before I could see what was crawling and wriggling about the straw-covered floor, emitting every now and then a weak, vacuous hiss. Then the shadow outlines began to take shape, and I perceived that the squirming entity bore some remote resemblance to a human form laid flat on its belly. I clutched the door handle for support, and I tried to keep from fainting. The moving object was almost of human size and nearly devoid of clothing. It was absolutely hairless. Its tawny-looking back seemed suddenly squamous in the dim, ghoulish light. Around the shoulders it was rather speckled and brownish, and the head was very curiously flat. As it looked up to hiss at me, I saw the beady little black eyes were damnably anthropoid, but I could not bear to study them long. They fastened themselves on me with a horrible presence that I could close the panel gaspingly and left the creature wriggling in the unseen matted straw in spectral twilight. I must have reeled a bit, for I saw that the doctor was gently holding my arm as he guided me away. I was stuttering over and over again, but for God's sake, what is it? Dr. McNeil told me the story in his private office as I sprawled opposite of him in my easy chair. The gold and crimson of late afternoon changed to the violet of early dusk, but still I awed and motionless, and I resented every ring the telephone and every whir of the buzzer, and I could have cursed the nurses and interns whose knocks now and then summoned the doctor briefly to the office. Night came, and I was glad my host switched on all the lights. Scientist though I was, my zeal for research was half forgotten amidst such breathless ecstasies of fright as a small boy might feel when whispered witch tales go round the chimney corner. It seems that Yig, the snake god of the Central Plains tribe, presumably the primal source of the most southerly Quetzalcoatl or Cucuzclian, was an odd half-anthropomorphic devil, highly arbitrary and capricious nature. He was not wholly evil, and usually quite well disposed towards those who gave proper respect to him and his children, the serpents. But in the autumn he became abnormally ravenous and had to be driven away by means of suitable rites. That was why the tom-toms in the Pawnee, Wichita, and Caddo country pounded ceaselessly week in and week out in August, September, and October, and why the medicine men made strange noises with rattles and whistles, curiously like those of the Aztecs and Maya. Yig's chief trait was a relentless devotion to his children, a devotion so great that the redskins almost feared to protect themselves from the venomous rattlesnakes which thronged the region. Frightful, clandestine tales hinted upon his vengeance upon mortals who flouted him or wreaked harm upon his wriggling progeny, his chosen method being to turn his victim after suitable tortures into a spotted snake. In the old days of the Indian Territory, the doctor went on, there was not quite so much secrecy about Yig. The Plains tribes, less cautious than desert nomads and pueblos, talked quite freely of their legends and autumn ceremonies with the first Indian agents, and let considerable the lore spread out through the neighboring regions of white settlement. The great fear came in the land rush days of '89, when the extraordinary incidences had been rumored, and the rumors sustained by what seemed to be hideously tangible proofs. Indians said that the new white men did not know how to get on with Yig, and afterwards the settlers came to take the theory at face value. Now, no old-timer in middle Oklahoma, white or red, could be induced to breathe a word about the snake god, except for in vague hints. Yet, after all, the doctor added with almost needless emphasis, the only true, authenticated horror had been the thing of pitiful tragedy, rather than of bewitchment. It's all very material and cruel. Even that last phase which had caused so much dispute. Dr. McNeil paused and cleared his throat before getting down to his special story, and I felt a tingling sensation, as when a theater curtain rises. The thing had begun when Walker Davis and his wife, Audrey, left Arkansas to settle in the newly opened public lands in the spring of '89. And the end had come in the country of the Wichitas, north of the Wichita River, in what is present Caddo country. There's a small village called Binger there now, and the railway goes through, but otherwise the place is less changed than other parts of Oklahoma. It's still a section of farms and ranches, quite productive in these days, since the great oil fields did not come very close. Walker and Audrey had come from Franklin County in the Ozarks with a canvas-topped wagon, 2 mules, an ancient useless dog called Wolf, and all their household goods. They were typical hill folk, youngish and perhaps a little more ambitious than most, and looked forward to a life of better returns for their hard work as they had in Arkansas. Both were lean, raw-boned specimens, the man tall, sandy, gray-eyed, and the woman short and rather dark, with a black straightness of hair suggesting slight Indian admixture. In general, there was very little distinction about them. But for one thing, their annals might have differed from those of 1,000 of other pioneers who flocked to the new country at the time. There was Walker's almost epileptic fear of snakes, which some laid to preternatural causes, and some said came from a dark prophecy about his end, with which an old Indian squaw had tried to scare him when he was small. Whatever the cause, the effect was marked indeed, for despite his strong general courage, the very mention of a snake would cause him to grow faint and pale, while the sight of even a tiny specimen would produce shock and sometimes bouldering on convulsive seizure. The Davises started out early in the year in the hopes of being on their new land for the spring plowing. Travel was slow, for the roads were bad in Arkansas, while the territory there was great stretches of rolling hills and red, sandy barrens without any roads whatever. As the terrain grew flatter, the change from their native mountains depressed them more. Perhaps then they realized that they found the people at the Indian agencies very affable, while most of the settled Indians seemed friendly and civil. Now and then they encountered a fellow pioneer with whom crude pleasantries and expressions of amiable rivalry were generally exchanged. Owing the season, there was not many snakes in evidence, so Walker didn't suffer from his special temperamental weakness. In the earlier stages of his journey, too, there were no Indian snake legends to trouble him, for the transplanted tribes from southeast do not share the wider beliefs of their western neighbors. As fate would have it, it was a white man at Ocmulgee in Creek Country who gave Davises the first hint of Yig belief, a hint which had a curiously fascinating effect on Walker, causing him to ask questions very freely after that. Before long, Walker's fascination had developed into a bad case of fright. He took the most extraordinary precautions at the end of nightly camps, always clearing away whatever vegetation he had found, avoiding stony places whenever he could. Every clump of stunted bush and every cleft in the white, great slab-like rocks seemed to him now to hide a malevolent serpents, while every human figure, not obviously part of a settlement or immigrant train, seemed to potential snake god, ill till nearness had proved the contrary. Fortunately, no troublesome encounters came to this stage to shake his nerves still further. As they approached the Kickapoo country, they found it harder and harder to avoid camping near rocks. Finally, it was no longer possible, and poor Walker was reduced to the puerile expedient of droning some of the rustic anti-snake charms he had learned in his boyhood. 2 or 3 times a snake was really glimpsed, and the sight did not help the sufferer in his efforts to preserve composure. On the 22nd evening of his journey, a savage wind made it imperative for the snake of the mules to camp sheltered in spots anywhere possible, and Audrey persuaded her husband to take advantage of a cliff which rose uncommonly high above the dried bed of a former tributary of the Canadian River. He did not like the rocky cast of the place, but allowed himself to be overruled this once, leading the animals sullenly toward the protecting slope, which nature of the ground would not allow a wagon to approach. Audrey, examining the rocks near the wagon, meanwhile noticed a singular sniffing on the part of the feeble old dog. Seizing a rifle, she followed his lead and presently thanked her stars when she had forestalled Walker in her discovery. For there, snugly nested in the gap between the 2 boulders, was the sight that would have done him no good, visible only as one convoluted expanse, but perhaps comprising as many as 3 or 4 separate units, was a mass of lazy wriggling, which could not be other than a brood of newborn rattlesnakes. Anxious to save Walker from a trying shock, Audrey did not hesitate to act, but took the gun firmly by the barrel and brought the butt down again and again upon the writhing objects. Her own sense of loathing was great, but did not amount to real fear. Finally, she saw her task was done, and turned to cleanse the improvised bludgeon in the red sand and dry dead grass nearby. She must, she reflected, cover the nest up before Walker got back from tethering the mules. Old Wolf, tottering relic of mixed shepherd and coyote ancestry that he was, had vanished, and she feared he had gone to fetch his master. Footsteps in that instance. Her fear was well founded. A second more and Walker had seen everything. Audrey made a move to catch him, as if he could faint, but he did not more than sway. Then the look of pure fright on his bloodless face turned slowly into something more like mingled with awe and anger as he began to upbraid his wife in trembling tones. God's sake, Aud, but why'd you go and do that for? Hadn't you heard the thing been telling about the snake devil Yig? You'd ought to have been told me. We'd moved on. Don't you know a devil god gets even mad if you hurt his children? What'd you think all the Injuns dances and beats their drums and fall about? This land's under a curse, I tell you. Nigh every soul we've talked to since coming in the same. Yigs rule here and comes out fall and his victims, and my odd, and won't none of them Injuns cost a Cajun kill a snake for love and no money. God knows what you done yourself, gal, stomping and a whole brood of Yig children. He'll get you for sure sooner or later, unless I can buy a charm off of some old Injun medicine man. He'll get you, odd, and they's God in heaven to come out at night and turn you into a crawling spotted snake. think we're going to stop right there. For now. It seems to me like Walker and his wife Audrey are in for some real trouble, wouldn't you say? And this language in reference to the natives and the indigenous people really are indicative of the time, I feel like. Which is a shame. But it seems to me like at least somebody is going to get their comeuppance. But I guess we'll find out the next one. Alright, bye now.